All right, here we are, video 6. I have to admit, this one has been a long time coming. And yes, I'm talking about video 6. So here we are, we're going to talk about the coming of the Lord, or what some people have come to refer to as the second coming of the Lord. And the question is it future or is it fulfilled?
Would you say the Bible speaks of a second coming of Christ?
Actually, the term second coming can only imply Hebrews 9:28, where it actually uses the word second. And it's talking temple language of the high priest coming at a second time to bear salvation.
Well, what about in the scriptures in Matthew 24, specifically 29 to 31, that says, "Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other."
We must begin to understand in the clouds, coming of the Lord in the day of the Lord, as Old Covenant language, as temple language used by the prophets. And we see this, we'll go through a couple verses. In Isaiah 13 we read, "Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Because of this, hands will go limp. Every man's heart will melt. Terror will seize them. Pain and anguish will grip them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at each other, their faces aflame. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance, to the end of the haughty, and will humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make man scarcer than pure gold, more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place at the wrath of the Lord Almighty in the day of his burning anger." And this was fulfilled in 539 BC. Then we have 2 Samuel 22. "In my distress I called upon the Lord. I called out to my God. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came to his ears. The earth trembled and quaked. The foundations of the heavens shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, bolts of lightning blazed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy with great bolts of lightning, and he routed them. The valley of the sea were exposed, and foundations of the earth laid bare, at the rebuke of the Lord, and the blast of breath from his nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me." And this was David talking about his rescue from Saul. Then we have Ezekiel 30. "Wail and say at last for the day of the Lord is near. The day of the Lord is near, a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations." Once again, this was fulfilled in 571 BC. Then we have Zephaniah chapter 1. "The great day of the Lord is near and coming quickly. Listen, the cry on the day of the Lord will be bitter, the shouting of the warrior there. The day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpets, and of battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. I will bring distress on the people, and they will walk like blind men, because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood will be poured out like dust, and their entrails like filth. Neither will their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on that day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole world will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end to all who live in the earth." This was fulfilled in 612 BC. Ezekiel 34. "Come near, you nations, and listen. Pay attention, you peoples. Let the earth hear and all that is in it, the world that comes out of it. The Lord is angry with the nations. His wrath is upon all of our armies. He will totally destroy them. He will give them over to the slaughter. Their slain will be thrown out. Their dead bodies will send up a stench. The mountains will be soaked with their blood. All the stars of heaven will be dissolved, and the sky roll up like a scroll. And the starry host will fall like withered leaves from the vine, like shriveled figs from the fig tree." This was fulfilled in 500 BC. And now we read Matthew 24, 29 through 31, the text you just read. "Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky, with power and great glory, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. And this was fulfilled in 70 AD. We must recognize the judgment language used in all of these verses upon certain nations. With that said, we see it clear that Jesus spoke of judgment that would occur after the tribulation. This is what is commonly called the second coming of Christ.
And you believe this happened already?
Yes, I believe the coming of the Lord happened in 70 AD. We see in videos 5, parts 1 and 4, how we went through the tribulation period and it was fulfilled and occurred in 70 AD. And in this verse, Matthew 24, we read, immediately after those days. It is important to understand the details of what his coming again was about. It was a judgment that would come upon the people who he told judgment was about to occur, and he would gather his elect to himself.
So most people are waiting for a literal sight, like a physical second coming in the clouds, because the scriptures say so, and Jesus did say that as well, that you'd see him coming and to watch. So how do you explain how his coming occurred?
When you look at all the different texts of this so-called second coming, which I would refer to as a coming of the Lord, because we've seen that there were many comings of the Lord throughout the whole Old Testament. But in the New Testament, we read Acts 1:11, where it says that he rose up hid in a cloud, and the angel said that he will come back in a like manner. Or we read Matthew 24, where it says that the sign of the coming of the Lord will be like in the clouds, and he will come in great glory. And then we read in other verses, we read about how Jesus would come on a horse. We read about how Jesus would come with a trumpet. Mainly read 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, 2 Peter chapter 3, Revelations 19. All these have different views of what that coming is going to look like. And basically, we need to understand the prophetic language used throughout the scriptures. And they're all about judgment. Consider John 14. It says that the world will never see me again. So, in 70 AD, what occurred was Jesus came on the clouds. He came in judgment. Clouds were a symbol of judgment. And they looked at the destruction of the temple and the judgment that came upon their people as a judgment for what occurred. Now, the believers obviously recognize this to be what the Apostle John spoke about in Revelations as they looked upon the one whom they pierced. And we see this in Revelations 1:7, and if you cross-reference this with Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, this truly was the day of the Lord in 70 AD.
That makes so much sense. So why is there so much confusion?
Well, you have popular creeds and confessions of the church that have pretty much put blinders on people. That even if I could show you clearly in Scripture where the coming of the Lord was a big theme throughout the Old Testament prophets, and how this all makes sense applied in that generation, the generation of Jesus and the apostles, still with the blinders of the confessions and the creeds and doctrine of the church, people will refuse to see what the Scriptures say and let the Scriptures speak for themselves. So it's so hard to get people to look at, forget your presuppositions and all your thoughts, and examine the evidence in light of Scripture. Secondly, a big misconception is our false hopes and expectations of what's going to happen after this second coming, or the parousia of Jesus Christ. We are in dire need of a paradigm shift in the church.
Parousia. What is that?
Parousia is a Greek word for the coming or the presence or visitation of the Lord. And we see this primarily in Revelations 21, where Jesus, at the end of everything, he says, "And now I will make my dwelling among men. I will be among them, and they will be my people." Another important part of the Parousia, a good way to understand, would be Stuart Russell's book. He wrote a book called The Parousia, and this book was recommended by both Charles Spurgeon and R.C. Sproul. And concerning what would happen after this second coming, or what is primarily called the second coming, but I like to call it the Parousia, or the coming of the Lord, that we were expecting, was judgment and resurrection. Those are the two primary things that would happen right after. There would be judgment, which we've seen upon Israel, and resurrection, which we will get into in later videos. Also, the crushing of Satan. Satan will be completely defeated, and our redemption would be completely fulfilled, our salvation, and then we would finally see God face to face. Our relationship would be fully restored with God.
So you believe the judgment, the resurrection, and the new heavens and new earth have already occurred as well?
Well, we see no disconnection between any of these in Scripture. There's no disconnect. So if we read in context and we apply things in context, yes, absolutely. And that's something we're going to get into in the next video, actually. And we have to recognize that without the coming of the Lord, without the resurrection, without the judgment, all those things occurring, certain parts of our salvation that we take for granted are not complete yet. And like I said, I want to touch on this a little bit more in video 7, but for now, I would really just give some scriptures to reference. I mean, Matthew 25, read the whole chapter. Read Romans 2. Read 1 Thessalonians 5. Read Matthew 16. Read 1 Thessalonians 4. And like I said, read on those texts and we will touch on them a lot more in the next video. Lastly, I want to take the scripture in context again. So let's read from Matthew 23, verses 34 to 36, real quickly, if you don't mind.
All right, 23. I'm sorry?
23, 34.
34. All right, it says, therefore, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify, others you will flog in your own synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, all this will come upon this generation.
Okay, so we see Jesus pointing at the Pharisees and the Sadducees and telling them, this is what you've done. All of this is going to be upon this generation. Now let's turn one chapter after and go to Matthew 24, verses 32 to 35.
Okay. It says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you will know that the summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away.
Right there, we see Jesus pointing at this generation, telling these people standing in that generation, this is going to occur to this generation. The time texts are unavoidable in the Bible. And once we come to grips with them and we read Scripture as Scripture speaks, it all begins to make perfect sense. So more on the resurrection, the judgment, and how all this looks within a full preterist, true biblical context in the next video.
Lord, I'm